My dad's one of 18 kids.
Whoa.
Yeah.
You got a big family.
Again.
Yeah, dad is one of 18 kids. Huge family, you know, little community.
Your grandmother's a hero.
Right.
What is up, everybody? It is Ed Gough Jr. of the Dad Central Show and Dad Central, and I am with a gentleman I have not heard from in a minute.
Oh, you mean me? Drew
Yes!
Soleyn.
Well,
Dad Central
no, you want me to look
and the
around
Dad
the corner
Central
for somebody?
Well, I thought you were talking about our guests, man. Like, you know, they're the star of the show.
Hold on. I've never met them until today, so unless you've met them.
No, I haven't.
Okay. All right. Good.
What's going on, Ed? How are you?
Let's do this first. And again, so the Dad Central Show is sponsored by Dove Men Plus Care. Dove Men Plus Care believes that care is the best of a man, because when men care for themselves and others, there is a positive impact. All right, let's see if we can get serious for a moment.
Do we have to? I think I'm too tired, honestly, to be serious today. So there might be some, you know, off the wall, off the cuff stuff, but
from you,
so that's good. Yeah, I know. That's rare, eh?
Oh,
rare
gosh.
I'm definitely a serious guy.
So everyone, this recording, you may want to save this for a long time, because you may never get it again like this.
This is what exhaustion will do to you, right? It's like you're drunk or something. It's like you just don't have the energy, so you just kind of let it all hang out. So
you actually, very interesting you mentioned that on one of the other conversations I host on my own platform, I have a lady who comes on once a month who's a holistic nutritionist.
Okay.
And she mentioned in one of our most recent conversations, sugar basically is almost like drinking alcohol. It, like having too much, sort of the effect it has on the body and the brain, it's almost like gets you drunk.
Oh, well, you know, like the line I have with the kids is like, sugar is poison, right? It's literally poisoning your body. I know there are people who necessarily agree with that, but remember we had Adam Hart on the show last year, and he talked about how he was addicted to sugar as a kid, and how it really deteriorated his health, and how he's really learned and refined that now as as an adult, as a dad. He's really eliminated a lot of that stuff because it becomes really problematic. So, anyways. We'll do another show. I'm sure we talked with Annika about nutrition one time, but we'll probably do another show where we talk a little bit more about the health and health aspects, and making good shows. Because I want to bring this up. I just got my Men's Health, and I was looking at the cover.
You still get that magazine?
Yeah, I do.
Oh my gosh, I remember subscribing to that 15, 20 years ago. I still have old episodes stored away.
Do you? Well, it's good for you to keep those. I started getting rid of them because I restarted them back in 2021. And so I enjoy reading them. On the cover, it's Dr. Peter Attia. Now, Paul Attia is a good friend of mine, which is Peter's brother. And so it's kind of cool to see a friend or a friend's family member kind of out there. And he's got a great book called Outlive. It's about longevity. But anyways, it was about really longevity in terms of in this article. And so it was talking about the different choices, the different things you make. Anyways, I think my point was it was really cool to see, him and the information that he's putting out there as far as helping create greater longevity and greater health. Just for men in general and for dads, we know that's important. One of our focuses this year was on dads taking care of themselves, right? So anyways, that's my little plug for Dr. Peter Attia, the Men's Health.
And it's not being paid, not a paid plug. There you go. So everyone else.
It's just good stuff. It's just good stuff.
Yeah. So this is the first time not the first. I'm using a different computer, because I've said to myself a long time I use a different computer, and it's not there yet visually, because you can see a little bit of the green. No, I'm not a Martian, by the way. So there's a little bit of green, but I said I wanted to commit myself. I got to use a better computer. So it's not there yet, but I want to ask the audience, if you're watching this live on replay, do you like the funky backgrounds, or just like something plain, like real, like what Drew has? So I don't know, Drew, what do you like?
I've only seen you with your funky backgrounds, so it's kind of your vibe. pun intended.
And that's something between Drew and myself. Go on.
So I think that, it works for you.
Yeah, it's not there because a little bit of it's not on yet, but you know what? I'll keep it as I'm going to work. It's a work in progress. There's a little bit of stuff going on there, but I like it, and it's nice. I got a nice 27-inch screen here, 4K, 5K resolution.
Now you just showing off.
I just given the deets because we're going to ask. So I'll give you the deets, and okay. It's all good. But you know what? We have 2 new friends waiting, so forget about 5K, forget about 27 inches, forget about what we're going on with. We're 2 new friends today.
Yeah. There are 2 guys that have had a podcast for 3.5 years, we've learned. So we're going to learn more about that. It's Joe and Jared. They're 2 dads from Michigan who, like most people during the pandemic.
I wonder if they're Wolverines or Spartans. Got to ask them that.
Oh, yeah. It'll be cool to have that conversation. We won't talk about the Lions, though. Okay. We'll leave that one.
Okay.
Decided to start so 2 dads who, like most people during the pandemic, decided to start a podcast. So almost 3.5 years later, the guys have gone from 2 kids to 4. That's 2 each. And are still trying to figure out how to adult and parent while their listeners follow their journey on Big Dad Energy. So, Joe and Jared, welcome to the show. Great to have you.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Good stuff. How's things going on in both your worlds?
It's going, just taking every day as we can with living and having the 2 like toddlers and a school age kid. It's like, just nonstop.
Tonight's movie night though, so can't complain too much.
What movie? You pick?
I don't know. So we devised a system that's supposed to go, everyone will pick 1 week, right? So we're supposed to rotate. My 3.5-year-old picks every week. There's nobody gets any choice. We've watched the anime My Neighbor Totoro for 3 straight weeks. It's his favorite movie right now. So he's already this morning woke up and said, I want to watch that tonight. We're like, buddy, you got to pick something else.
Wow, you know what? I'm just going to interject a quick story. That I was out driving, and I live in Toronto, but I listen. There's a Buffalo sports station. I won't give the name because that's a plug. And one of the commentators said, "Oh, it was my daughter's birthday yesterday," and the other commentator said, "Did you take her to a Sabres game?" He goes, "Oh, I really wanted to, but her bedtime's at 7:30." So he said no, but he said, we made sure we sung happy birthday between the first and second period.
we like going to Wings games here, but we run into the same problem. Bedtime's at 7:30, and the one time we let him stay up and go to a hockey game, about middle of the second period, we had to call it. It was too late. We had to call it there. So
all right. Good stuff. Drew, go for it.
Well, I mean, just to add on to that, when you do maybe make the choice to let the kids stay up a little bit later, typically they kind of, they crash at a certain point in time, but the next day is really when it comes out.
Yeah.
By about middle of the afternoon, it's like they're completely worn out and gassed from not getting to sleep the night before. And watch out again, depending on age and stage, but that's what I've found. And especially if they get hungry and tired, good luck with that one.
Nobody ever tells you that kids don't sleep in. They don't. It doesn't matter how late they stay up. They wake up at the same time. And my oldest is an early riser, 6:05 every morning.
Wow.
And so if he's up till 9:30, it's still 6 o'clock the next day. Kids don't sleep in. They just don't.
Yeah. Well, my kids just don't sleep. My kids don't go to bed till like. My kids are up to like 10:30. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, my kids are up to like 10:30 every night. They just, and then they're up to go to school the next morning. It's rough. It's a rough life. This is all Jared and I talk about on our podcast. Is how I just miss having a me time to like play a video game or something.
Yeah, that is being in the trenches of fatherhood, and trying to figure all that stuff out when you got all these different demands on your time, especially when they're young. And sleep is definitely one of those things. I heard you guys talking about that on your show, and I was like, I wonder if that's going to come up today. So I get you. I feel your pain. Sleep is definitely one of those important things. But we typically like to start the show by getting a little bit of the backstory right? How did you guys, kind of grow up, or how did things kind of lead you to the point where you're, now, dads and running this podcast? So why don't you tell us, well, maybe we'll start with you, Joe. Tell us a little bit about life growing up and kind of what led you to, becoming a dad.
Yeah. So I have a kind of different story, I guess, than some folks. My dad worked second shifts growing up. So he worked from 4 p.m. to midnight every night. So he wasn't really around. I would get up and go. My mom worked at a daycare. So I'd get up and go to daycare with her. And then I would go to school. And then I would come home and be with my mom. And then I would see my dad on the weekends. And those were like the moments where I would play soccer or whatever, and he would go see a game. Or my dad's one of 18 kids. So we would have big, yeah.
Okay.
You got a big family.
Stop. Wow. Rewind.
Yeah.
Say that again.
Yeah. Dad is one of 18 kids. So huge family, little community. So
your grandmother's a hero.
Right. Yeah. It's crazy.
She's an amazing woman.
Yeah. 18 kids. It's nuts. So on the weekends, we would also go and do like, my grandparents both passed away. My grandma passed away before I was born, and my grandpa passed away when I was like 4 or 5. But the family still kind of has the house. So we would go there and do cookouts and stuff like that. So I would see him on the weekends, either in the community setting with his siblings and nieces and nephews, or like soccer games, or, around the house or whatever. So I had my mom most days. And then when I was 10, we actually, we lost our house. We didn't make enough money, so we were losing our house. So we moved into the house with that my grandparents owned. And at the same time, my dad got diagnosed with colon cancer.
Oh,
wow. And he ended up passing away when I was 13. Wow. So I have had like 19 years without my dad. So I was raised a lot by my mom. And then I'm also an oops baby. So I have 3 older sisters that are, the oldest is 18 years older than me, and the youngest is 10 years older than me. So I had nieces who were 3 years younger than me and 7 years younger than me. So my nieces became my sisters, and then my mom was my full-time parent. So I kind of have been raised by my mom my whole life, and by my sisters, and then having my nieces there to kind of be support systems or playmates, whatever it may be. So that's kind of how I was raised and led into adulthood, as, just kind of me and my mom.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a lot in that short story. But first, I just want to say, obviously, I'm really sorry to hear about your father and your grandparents.
Thank you.
Obviously, 19 years ago doesn't necessarily diminish the impact on you. So I'm gonna just say that, and I'm gonna pause, but I do want to come back to that, and then let's hear a little bit from Jared.
Yeah,
let's hear your story, Jared.
So, in ways, my story is a little bit inverse of Joe. I actually grew up with divorced parents. Who both remarried very quickly after they got divorced. So instead of Joe growing up mainly with just his mom, I grew up with 4 parents. Lots of parental influence, fairly strict parents too. So grew up really just kind of bouncing back and forth. My dad lived in upstate New York, and my mom lived here in Michigan. So just going back and forth. What's the main road between Sarnia and Niagara Falls? The 401, is that?
Yeah. 401 and QEW, basically. Yeah.
I've driven that road many times. So going back and forth and just kind of that's how I grew up. It was all normal to me. It didn't seem out of place until I kind of grew up and went to college and started to, expand my experiences, talking to other people. And now, everybody grew up, and I was also a military brat growing up. So I moved all over the country, lived a bunch of places, and not growing up and things like that. I didn't take a ton into my, projecting how I would be a parent, but I knew I always wanted to be a dad. That was, I would say, a driving factor. Even back in college, I remember Joe probably will laugh at the story. I remember I was dating a girl who was younger than I was, and I was getting ready to graduate. And I was already thinking about like what comes next. When can I start a family? When can I, take that next step? And she wasn't ready for that. And we ended up breaking up because of it. So always knew I wanted to be a parent. And that was always like a driving goal of mine. And then obviously met my now wife, had the same goals, same intentions. But when the time kind of finally came that I was going to be a dad, Joe had already had his first kid. And he was the only friend that I had around our age that had a kid and was kind of going through it. So we sat down and we had a conversation about like, hey, I'm going to need a lot of advice from you. Like I have, I'm having this kid. I don't, my parents and I don't talk a bunch about like that. And plus they raise kids in a different time. It's very different now. Right. And so I'm going to need somebody to lean on. And Joe's like, why don't we get together and kind of record these conversations? I'm sure a lot of people are going to like have the same thoughts and fears that you're going through about becoming a new dad. And that's kind of how we ended up on Big Dad Energy. It was an internet meme at the time. Everything was big energy, right? Big this energy, big that energy. And we kind of stole it and made it our own. And that's kind of how we here 3.5 years later have ended up powering through and having this podcast.
Nice. That's great. Yeah. Interesting. Like just the juxtaposition between, Joe's experience and your experience, right? Ed, I want to make sure you hop in here.
Yeah, I have a question for Joe and Jared, both of you. Thanks for sharing. But Jared just shared that it seemed that at a very young age, he wanted to be a dad. Did you have that also early in your journey?
Yeah, I did. And I think that was part of not having a dad who is, in quotes, present, right? Because he was working when I was home. And then also having the experience of my nieces who were so close in age to me, kind of their, I looked to be their role model, like in my own eyes, like, hey, I'm going to be your role model. Let me help raise you kind of thing. Whether or not they saw it that way, that's how I saw it. So my entire life I was raised around kids too, because, my sisters would have more babies as they grew up. So yeah, definitely always knew that I wanted to be a dad too. My wife, I've been with my wife since I was 16. So for 16 years we've been together, and she will always say like, I proposed 4 different times before she said yes, and was ready to have a kid kind of right out the gate. So yeah, I definitely have always wanted to be a dad.
Good. For both of you, I look at both of you and it's you're opposites, but you attract. But it seems that there's a common bond. What can you reflect back to that first meeting you both had?
I think we both know this story very well. So Joe is 2 years older than me?
Something like that. Yeah.
2 years, yeah. 1 grade. He's 1 grade older than me.
Right.
And so Joe was in a fraternity in college. I know it doesn't look like he was a fraternity man, but we both were in college. And so we went to Western Michigan out in Kalamazoo. Okay. And Joe was a year older and was in the fraternity already when I joined. And to join a fraternity, it's not like the movies. I guess some probably are like the movies. Ours was not like the movies. You didn't go through, a whole big thing. But for us, we still had a pledging process. It was a semester long, of learning how to be in the fraternity. And Joe was the leader of that. So he was the one in charge. So as I went through that and kind of just learned about the fraternity and things like that, Joe was the one that I went to there. And then after I was officially in the fraternity, I actually lived in the fraternity house during the summertime when there was no school, and Joe did too. And during that summer, we both really liked the show Scrubs. I don't know if you remember that show. And Joe would go off. This is a story for a different time. Joe had a terrible job that summer, a very, very terrible job. We've talked about it in the podcast. And I worked in a manufacturing facility. So we would get home about the same time, about 5:30 every night, and we would just pile into my room and watch Scrubs on my TV. And we did it literally every night all summer long. And ever since then, we've been friends ever since.
Good stuff.
But like not good enough friends to like we weren't in each other's weddings, but like, you know.
Well, different times.
Drew, let's get back in here because I know there could be some scary stuff if we go any further down the road.
That's good. No, it's cool. You know, it reminds me back in my college days, and you know, my friend Ben, and just the hijinks we got up to. Actually, I did grad school at Central Michigan.
Oh, okay.
You know, so I know Michigan pretty well. Chippewas, they're flying C, whatever they're called now. They're Chippewas is probably inappropriate. But anyways, I digress. So you know, it's great to have that connection though, that bond and that friendship. But I'm curious to ask one more question about kind of your stories before you got to the podcast. And Joe, I'm going to ask you this question about who are the other, I guess, fatherly influences that you found or gravitated towards that helped support you through that time without your father, and then like what did they mean to you, if you can recall that?
Yeah. So in those moments, looking back on it, I didn't really have somebody right when I was 13, right? That kind of was like my main staple, in quotations, father figure. It was always my mom, right? Everything looking back on it has always been my mom. And I didn't feel like a need to have a father figure in my life. As soon as my dad passed away, I kind of knew right then the type of person I needed to be for my mom and for my sisters. My sisters were raised very much by my dad and act a lot like my dad, who wasn't always the nicest person in the world. And my nieces will say, they'll tell my mom, Grandma, your son is such a better person than my mom is, or whatever it might be. And I always say, that's because I was raised by my mom basically full time. My uncles were there. Again, there's 12 of them, I think, or 11 of them. So they were they were around kind of at holidays and stuff, and a couple were there more prominently. But really, it was my mom. And then, to be honest, when I met my wife, when we started dating when I was 16, her dad stepped in. And her dad, my now father-in-law, has been probably one of the biggest, most helpful, and greatest pieces of my life is having him in there, because he really was like, all right, let's go learn how to change the oil in your car. Let's go learn how to fix your dishwasher, whatever it might be, how to build stuff, how to make things. So kind of from the moment I was 16, 17, he had stepped in and been that for me. But up until that point, it was really just my mom for the most part.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Thanks for sharing. Jared, how about you? You ended up with two families, right? Going back and forth. And so you probably had two, father. Well, you had your father, and then maybe had another stepdad.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about the fatherly influences that you've had?
Yeah, I can. And they're not always great. I think it's one thing Joe and I cover a lot. So another big part of the topics we cover on the show is I've been in therapy for about 3 years now, dealing with depression and anxiety. And so we cover that a lot. And a lot of that stems from ways that I grew up, things that happened when I grew up. And so I mentioned my dad lived in upstate New York. Well, I only ever saw him during the summertime. And even that in itself was rough, because I make all these friends. I have all these friends during the school year. And then 3 months, you're 12 hours away in upstate New York with no friends. You're just in a house by yourself. Right. And on top of that, my dad worked a lot. He's very career focused, very focused on that, or he was. As he's gotten older, things have changed, as they do for all of us. But when I was growing up, he was very career focused. And for big chunks of time, him and I weren't close. And then there was a time in college where we didn't talk at all, and things like that. So mainly my stepdad was the one I looked at it as the main person I tried to shape myself after and look after. So while also dealing with the fact that my real dad was not very present, even though he was there and around, it just wasn't super connected, super close. So it has started to shape who I am and the dad that I want to be. And one thing we talk about a lot is like how to turn away from those stereotypes of the dads before us, right? You heard Joe mention his father wasn't always nice. And then the same thing with, you know, my dad not always being around. These topics that we try and cover a lot about, like, how do we avoid stepping in the same pitfalls that they fell into, right, from their parents? And that's why we're talking about therapy, talking about some of these techniques and things like that we've uncovered along the way have been super helpful. So I would say a lot of my influence is learning what not to do versus learning what to do.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, thanks both of you for sharing that and being just, you know, honest and real about the not always easy parts. But I want to just acknowledge, you know, your desire and your drive to make a change, right? You know, this year on our show, our focus is, you know, how do we help fathers like you break that cycle of fatherlessness? You know, how do we engage the men, the fathers who want to be different, who want to engage with their children, who want that relationship, who want that connection, who want to be present, who want to be connected and kind. And so, you know, they hear the work and the steps that you're taking for yourselves, and also the community essentially that you two of you are creating for yourselves, but also bringing others along on the journey. I just want to acknowledge, you know, that's the type of stuff that has to happen to achieve the goal of breaking that cycle of fatherlessness. And I mean, it sounds like there's, you know, some elements of pain that each of you experienced in the process. And so I think that's very relatable for a lot of us. But the overriding thing that I hear is the drive and desire to make it different for yourselves. So I just want to acknowledge you guys for that and just appreciate you guys coming on the show and talking about this.
Are you a dad who feels like you're juggling a million things at once? Balancing work, family, and personal goals can be overwhelming. But what if there was a solution? That's why we created our new fatherhood community called Dad Mentor. For over 20 years, Dad Central has built practical tools to help dads. We understand the challenges you face and provide the support you need to thrive. The biggest complaint we hear from dads is there's no dedicated support for their specific needs. But not anymore. Our new community, called Dad Mentor, is here to transform your fatherhood experience. Imagine feeling in control, staying calm and patient when your children misbehave. Picture yourself connected to your children, guiding them with confidence and watching them succeed. When you join Dad Mentor, you'll have access to a community of like-minded dads committed to their dad journey, just like you. You'll also get the Dad's Roadmap. This is a step-by-step plan to help you go from unsure to unstoppable as a dad. Monthly masterclasses and Q&A sessions. You'll get answers and know exactly what to do straight from experts. Monthly group meetups that connect dads over common topics. A dad's resource library. Curated webinars, podcasts, or guides built by Dad Central to help you grow as a parent. And finally, you'll also get exclusive members-only offers and events. Now, many dads do try to do this fatherhood thing alone, only to find themselves trapped in frustration and strained relationships. Then they may turn to unhealthy coping mechanisms like drugs, alcohol, or other distractions, leaving their family and their own well-being at risk. We don't want you to reach that point of regret. Take steps to invest in you and your family today. Join Dad Mentor and go from stressed, tired, and overwhelmed to confident, calm, and connected. Join us today by going to dadcentral.ca/dads.
From hearing both of yours journey, the word presence resonates. So from sharing with our family here who is listening or watching, there wasn't the greatest presence of fathers when we were younger. What does fatherhood presence mean to you now, both of you being dads?
Yeah. I know for me, it's being as active as I can with my kids. And even if that's like taking the moment and realizing, hey, I've been scrolling on TikTok for like 5 minutes too long. Like, I need to get on this floor and wrestle my daughter. Like, I need to be there when she's sad and comfort her, and also give her moments when she's mad to step away, but then come back around to acknowledge, why she's angry or whatever it might be. And then same with my son, realizing, hey, bud, like, you're growing up in a different time than when I grew up, but just based on being, a white male, like you unfortunately have some stigma based on that because you are in a spot of privilege in quotations. So making sure that as he grows up, even though he's only 2, realizing like, hey, you're not always going to get kind of your way and your want all the time, and that's okay. So by being present, for me, it's like being there for the good times, being there for the conversations that need to be had, and then also helping them learn their way in the world and making sure that they are growing up to be the best people they can be with, open and honest and inviting to everybody around. And I think by being present, me and my wife are trying to do that and making sure like being as open and honest as we can. So that way they know to be open and honest as much as they can as well. And being inviting to everybody that they can be and not kicking anybody down. So I guess a long-winded answer is, that's my being presence, is just being the best in my eyes as I can be for them.
And I would say for my side of things, physical presence is probably the biggest thing that I've taken away. It makes sense from how I grew up, right? With a dad being very far away and not being available. And I just want to be available for my kids whenever they need me. So, one of the things that came out of the pandemic is remote work, right? That's been kind of a big thing for a long time, but it's something I was actually working towards before the pandemic for this reason. I'm a fully remote worker. I can't see myself going back into an office for the reason that I have the amount of flexibility. Like today, I'm going to leave work at 3 and my kids are going to come home from Katie's mom's house early so I can spend time with them before Katie gets home from work and things like that. And so that we can just spend time together. If I was in an office, I'd have to figure out, all right, coverage, I got to drive home, I got to plan so many more things that prevent the flexibility of me just being physically present there for my kids whenever they need me, whenever I can possibly be, and allow me that extra time with them and allow me to be available. And I think another side that going off what Joe said is emotionally available as well. One thing that is a stigma of our fathers and their fathers and is going to forever be that way unless we make a difference is that they didn't show emotion. They didn't talk about emotion. They didn't declare emotion. And it took me a long time and hours of therapy to get to a point where I can accurately communicate what I'm feeling and actually feel emotions. I think that was a big part of going through that process that I learned is like, I can't just hide things. I can't just bury things because then I'll, outburst or I'll feel, thoughts that I don't want to feel and things like that. And through my journey, passing that emotionally on to my kids of now that Ben is, getting to the age where 3.5 is like going through puberty. It's the wildest thing, watching him like be totally cool and then suddenly throw train tracks across the room because he just suddenly felt anger, and like going and having those discussions with him about like, that's okay. It's okay to be angry. We have to show it differently. We have to express it in different ways, but feeling it's totally fine. And just being physically present and emotionally present for my kids are the two biggest things that I'm trying to focus on as we go through this.
Thanks. That's good. Drew?
That's really good stuff. And especially that last part, which I think many dads, depending on their age and their experiences, still really struggle with. So the fact that you're intentional about recognizing the need for that and taking the steps to, really work on your own self first so that then you can help support your children as they grow and develop through these important stages when they're learning the foundations of, are emotions okay or are they not? What emotions do the adults and the influential people in my life accept, or do they not? How do I process them in a healthy way? How do I learn about healthy relationships or healthy regulation? So the fact that you're doing that right now, I just want to again commend you guys for the work that you're doing. So somehow, some way, you guys, obviously your friendship started, but then the podcast started, and I'm curious to know, how has the podcast supported both of your goals around your fatherhood, this idea of presence, this growth journey, and of course just impacting your family?
Yeah, Joe and I had this saying when we started the podcast. So little background is I had messed around doing some live streaming on Twitch for a while before this. And so I had all the infrastructure set up, and the easiest thing was, hey, all I have to do is press a button and I can put us on the internet. Like it's that simple nowadays. And so the infrastructure was there. And when we started having these conversations, I had known from doing a little bit on Twitch that content creation is incredibly hard because people don't just find you, right? They're not just there for you. And so Joe and I had this mantra from the beginning of, if this is just a way for Joe and I to sit down for an hour once a week and just de-stress and talk about all the stuff that we're going through right now in regards to parenting and how hard being a parent is, then we're getting enough out of it that we can keep it going. It doesn't matter if people listen. It doesn't matter if, it's this huge thing that supports us or our families. It really is, if it supports the two of us and our mental and emotional health of being dads, then it's good enough to be, it's good enough to keep going. And honestly, we've carried that throughout this it's how it's ended up at 3.5 years. There's been plenty of time. I mean, the birth of Joe's second kid when you have a newborn and a toddler, and then the birth of my second kid when you have a newborn and a toddler. I mean, these times there were, we had to skip weeks. We had to find, but we forced ourselves to get into okay, we have to sit down and record this week just so we can chat, just so we can get these emotions off our chest that we can't really talk to a ton of people, because like we said before, only a few people in our close friend group have kids. And so it's really the two of us that are able to express these emotions while the other one understands what you're going through. And, if it's tips and tricks, we joke a lot. We try to do like an educational series of this is how, what you should look for in diapers and wipes. And then at the end of it, every time we're like, honestly, we also have no idea what we're doing. We're just trying to let you know what worked for us and what didn't. And that's good enough. That's kind of the mantra of, if we can just have these conversations and get out in the open and let people relate to the fact that we're all going through the same things or similar things, and we're all here for each other, then it's good enough for us.
Yeah. And, some people would ask, why don't you just go to a bar and have a drink and do that? Jared and I live over an hour away from each other, so we can't just go out and have a drink and commiserate together. So this is where it's this forces us to talk to each other. And that's kind of in quotations, ego, right? Oh, people are going to listen to us. But again, like Jared said, that wasn't ever really the point. It just forced us to be hey, we need to produce a podcast so that we would be forced to talk to each other about what's going on in our lives and our kids' lives.
Nice.
I don't know how much we talked about it before we started the recording. The pandemic had some impact with both you as fathers. So I think it'd be really great for our family here to hear your fatherhood journey, especially in regards to the pandemic, because I find it quite heroic and quite amazing. So if either one of you could just share, because also your show was birthed because of that too, but it'd be great if you could just share some of that.
Yeah, my daughter Cora was born in November of 2019, right? Kind of at the rumblings of the coronavirus was going around. And my wife had gone back to work in February of 2020. She's a therapist, so she went back into work in February of 2020 and worked for a month before things hit. So we had Cora in a in-home daycare for 1 month as we were getting to the routine of okay, this is what work is like with a kid. And then it's oh, wait, never mind. Everything's thrown off. So Cora was 4 months old come March of 2020. So we had a infant who, you know, needed diapers changed every hour, needed to be fed every other hour, needed, you know, to go down for naps and this and that. Right as the coronavirus, or right as the pandemic for the coronavirus happened. And that was something that was just like such a whiplash, right? Because I also was in the office and my job was an hour away, but now suddenly I'm home. And it's like, you think, great, cool, I can focus on work. But then you're like, oh, never mind. My infant has so much that they need taken care of too. So as far as like going through the pandemic, you know, months and months of just staying inside, right? Like, hey, nobody breathe on this child. They're so fragile. Nobody come near us. Stay outside of my house. And because Cora's so new at that point, I have family that are like, hey, I want to see her. Like, I want to, you know, is there any way I can see her? And it's like, you can come to my house and look through my window and I will show you my kid. And unfortunately, that's kind of what we got to do to be safe at this point in time. So that's kind of where my entire 2020 was that. At some point, you know, we started kind of getting a little bit looser with who was around, but you know, by the end of the year, it was still pretty much like, hey, we still got to be cautious with this thing. And we had already had our, you know, ours born pre-pandemic, but Jared's whole world changed come 2020.
Boy, did it. In a couple different ways. I started a brand new job February of 2020. So yeah, that's a different story for a different time. On the kid front, we learned that we were pregnant for Ben. Funny enough, we found out the day I interviewed for this new job. It was all a big like one day kind of thing. And so that was December of 2020. And as we went to the first appointment, everything was totally, you know, it was pre-pandemic, starting to get those rumbles, but not even a mask mandate yet or anything like that. And then by the time that we had the anatomy scan, which is Joe, maybe you remember it, 17 weeks,
20 weeks.
Yeah. Everything was shut down. That was the only other doctor appointment that I was able to go to, because Katie had to go by herself to every other one. And so as that was the only one I was able to go to. And then, you know, I wasn't even allowed to go. I was only able to go to the ultrasound, and I wasn't able to go to the actual physician's exam room afterwards. I had to go back to the lobby. And so, going through that was it. That was all I could do. You know, we were at home that whole time. We'd literally just moved into this house that we're in now, during that time. And so, really it was a lot of just being at home, you know, during that first summer, kind of figuring out, we ordered everything online, right? So like, all of our original stuff all came from Wayfair, and it was all like trying to find out, you know, you can't go test this stuff. You can't go into Pottery Barn and look at the things that you like and what crib you like and whatnot. So Katie was on the internet all the time, researching what the best thing was. And that was a lot of our experience, is just research and internet. And then as we did that and kind of went through it, Ben was born in late August, still height of the pandemic, right before that big fall surge that really was really bad. And so nobody was allowed to come to the hospital with us. Katie's mom wasn't allowed to even come visit us in the hospital. So first time parents, Ben was born at like 2:00 in the morning. And Ben actually, we had a fairly traumatic experience during Ben's birth, not necessarily from the pandemic, but just he came out, he wasn't breathing right away. He had to go to the NICU for a while right after he was born. And we had to do that all by ourselves, right? So like the craziest thing is Ben was born and had to go through a little bit of resuscitation to get him to breathe for the first time. And then they whisked him off to the NICU, and I had to go with him, right? Because I'm the dad. I have to, you know, Katie has to stay there to get everything taken care of after birth. And I got whisked away to the NICU. Nobody was with Katie and nobody was with me in the NICU. We're just by ourselves in these very high stress scenarios and places in the hospital. Katie's, you know, had just given birth. I wasn't even able to like check on her and see if she's okay because we were so worried about Ben. And then all of a sudden I had to go, and like it was luckily Ben was only there for 2 hours, and then we were able to all get back together for the next day and a half or so. But we couldn't go out to get food. That's the other thing. We had to only eat hospital food, and I don't know if you've ever had hospital food, but I would not recommend it. Yeah. We couldn't leave the hospital at all. We couldn't really walk the halls or anything like that. The only thing I could do is go down the lobby to get a Starbucks coffee and come back up. Right. That was about it. And so the other thing is the hospital was empty, right? Because you could only be there if it's an emergency or if you're having a baby. And so, it was empty. And so it was a pretty wild experience. And at that low point, on the flip side from Joe, where he had already started kind of learning how to manage that balance of working and parenting, that was never an issue. My wife's a kindergarten teacher, so everything was already remote. They taught remote for basically that 2020 to 2021 school year. So for the first year of my son's life, he had both parents working from home at home the whole time. And it was great. It was phenomenal. It was a really, obviously circumstances terrible, everything about it. Not, we had my parents come in, but they had to wait like 6 weeks before we were able to say like, okay, you can come in, but we need you to take a COVID test before you come in the house. You got to wear, double masks on the plane, make sure that everything is that was the beginning right before vaccines started. So we were able to be like, okay, there's a light coming for all the people that aren't necessary, right? Like the people that aren't closest, we could say, let's wait until the vaccine and then we can start to see more people. But yeah, right at the beginning, it was lonely. I'll be honest. Like that's a part of the reason this you can see all the little things that pointed to how this podcast started. Like it was lonely. It was, you're in a house by yourself in Joe's case, just him, his wife and his kid. And then for me, it was just me and Katie while she was pregnant. And then newborn came and it was just the three of us in the house for a while. And so, yeah, definitely strange, especially after we had a second kid where things are a little bit easier. Like Katie's mom, they weren't able to be there for the birth, but they were able to come. Ben and Katie's mom were able to come and visit us after when Will was born, and I was able to actually leave and go get food. That was a big upgrade. So yeah, definitely contrasted two experiences. It's pretty wild.
Well, I'll go hand it back to Drew in just a second. I just hope that everyone lives long enough that you can share those stories with your children.
Yeah, me too. It is they're recorded. We, after each birthday, in sleep deprived managed fashion, we forced each other to go through and have the how did it all go conversation right after the birth. So those conversations are recorded and they'll be out there forever.
Excellent. Drew?
Well, I'm just curious, like, what do you think you both now take away from that experience that are strengths? Like, what's a strength that you've gained as a result of going through that?
That's a good question. I think for me, it's like adaptability, right? Like up until that point, my way of life was kind of set in stone. I kind of went to work, Monday through Friday in an office and left, and then came home. So as soon as that happened, it's like, okay, we now need to change everything. We need to learn how to balance, meetings with her therapy sessions, and then also, feedings and things like that. And also, I'm a very extroverted person. Jared and I had this conversation last night. I'm super I get my energy from being out in the world with people. It was so hard for me just to be in the house for like 8 months. It felt like, so learning to be okay and get energy from the space that I'm in versus needing to constantly be out and be surrounded by other people, that being home with Cora and Kayla it was a safe space where they could also give me the energy I needed.
I think on top of the adaptability, to put a cherry on top of that thought, none of us know what we're doing before we become dads for the first time. You read your books, you listen to podcasts, you do whatever you can. You have no idea until it happens, until you go through it. And I think that almost made it easier, right? Because you come into such a wild scenario, right? Where it's like everything is different. Not just, okay, now you have to try and add a child to your lifestyle. Your whole lifestyle has already been turned upside down and flipped around, and it's different now. And so bringing a child into that almost just reshaped, as I think that term new normal is kind of overused, but in this concept of like, my life is different now, and now I'm just going to reshape it with having a child included in that, almost made it a little bit easier. And so being adaptable, and I would also say really knowing your family. I don't have a good buzzword to put on that idea, but you spend so much time, like Katie was 9 months pregnant and we're locked in the house. We can't go anywhere. We can't get the food that we want to eat. We can't, like all these kind of things. You have to really know your partner, and then adding in a child to that. I think a big major change a lot of people don't understand is how much of your life is your child, right? When you have that first kid, people don't really understand that. And Katie and I had already been home in one house together, learning how to be stuck together in one house for 6 months at that point, right? We had already been, learning that. And so it made it, when we had to change to be like, okay, now we're focusing on our kids, we were so much more emotionally in tune with each other that understood that, okay, Katie has to go to bed at 7:00 because she's awake and breastfeeding all night. So she has to go to bed right now. And that's okay. Right. I understand that, instead of, hey, this is different than what it used to be. We used to watch TV. We used to, pick date nights and things like that. We had already changed so much about that going and becoming adaptable about having a kid, it almost had already forced us into that mindset already. So made it almost, well, I can't say it's easier because I don't have any outside experience of what it would have been like beforehand. But for me, because so much had already been changing and things like that, it was kind of just another keep rolling with the waves and see what happens next.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Makes sense though, right? This change was really forced upon you. You had no choice. So what are you going to do? Right. You're either going to adapt or you're going to go crazy. Right. Yeah. So most people wouldn't opt for the second option. So you got to find a way through it and fight through it. So, okay. That's great, guys. Thanks so much. Ed, over to you.
I've got one of two roads I want to go through, so I don't know which one I should go to. Okay. Let me go the easier one. I think the other one would be interesting, but we can save it for another time. I want to get back to the presence, being dads and presence. Can you provide some suggestions to our dads, fathers, and those gentlemen who are caregivers when they're not feeling present? What are some suggestions you could provide to get them back into that presence zone as a dad?
You're asking the right question to the right people. You're looking at two people.
That's why I went for the easier one.
Yeah. You're looking at two people who suffer from ADHD and are always in two places at once. We talk about this quite a bit about how to remind yourself that you need to be where you are, right? And be where your feet are. And the advice I would give is I don't want to start with don't. The advice I would give is to be aware of what you're doing on a regular basis. So for me, especially during football season, I know you mentioned at the start you don't want to talk about the Lions, so I won't bring them up. But at the start of football season, like during football season, I'm on Twitter constantly. Injury updates, scores, like signings, anything. I'm getting as much football information as I can. And because of that, I am distracted, right? And I'm not being present with my kids. I'm not playing with my kids. I'm leaning against the counter, scrolling Twitter to see what the most recent injury update was, or how'd this team do, or anything like that, right? And it took me a long time because if you're not present and you're not thinking about it, you're just doing it second nature, right? You're just scrolling, you're just refreshing, and you're just kind of like, yeah, it's totally normal. But when you take a step back and you realize the situation that you're in, you're like, oh, my kids are in there playing trains and I'm not at all in this scenario. I'm not in this situation. And so just trying to be mindful of what is actually happening in that moment, and then reevaluating if you're doing what is bringing you energy, if you're doing what feels good at the time, right? Because sometimes, and another thing we like to talk about is you do have to give yourself breaks, right? You can't always be on, you can't always be in it. And so if that's your escape for a few minutes so you can get back into the mud, that's okay. Just make sure you're not staying longer than you wanted to in that moment.
Yeah, and I would echo all of that, right? Like, exactly. If you catch yourself, at least again from my perspective, if I catch myself scrolling for too long, like, put the phone away, get on the floor with the kids. I think another good way to kind of stay present is if you have a child who is able to communicate their wants, their needs, and what excites them, find the common ground, right? Like, even if their core is 4 years old, she's the smartest 4-year-old I've ever met in my entire life. But the girl is a ham and she loves to sing and dance and like act and play pretend really well, like really, really well. And I'm a theater kid. I love singing and dancing. So we're a singing, dancing house, right? So like, ask, as best as you can, hey, what do you like to do? Like, what do you want to play today? What book do you want to read? Is there a song you want to listen to? Like, let's go crazy and have a karaoke party and just sing and dance, whatever it might be. So being able to communicate with your kid just as like hey, what interests you? If you've never asked that before, like a 4-year-old might have something wild. They might say tacos, not even know what a taco is. And you're like, let's go make some tacos. Let's do it. Like, and just building that common ground with communication is key. And again, sometimes communication is not as easy for some kids or for some parents, but I think being able to form a little bit of a communication bond between you and the kids will help so much, keeping you present.
One last thing I'll say on that topic too is don't rush. One thing that struggles with me is we're always looking for that after they go to bed, right? Or that next step of, okay, when they do this, or when we start bath time, when we start bedtime. Don't rush. It's like, just be where your feet are in that moment, enjoy the time. And that's might be the hardest part, because I don't know, we are very schedule oriented. You have to be schedule oriented with kids. I mean, that's just a plain and simple fact, but try to stick to the schedule without rushing through the schedule, if that makes sense.
Great. Drew?
Yeah, I want to share a quick story on that last point, Jared. My kids are probably, like, I had twin daughters. They were probably about 4 at the time, and my son was maybe like 2. And we were at friends like a couple hours away over the holidays. And our friends went to one of their friends who we'd never met before. And so we were just, visiting, having a really good time, enjoying it. And one thing, we all had young kids. And one thing that the dad said, as his kids were a little bit older, he made this simple phrase, and it's always stuck with me. He's like, one day you're going to miss it. Mm-hmm. And because we tend to be like, okay, let's get through this. Like, this is hard stuff. Like, let's move it. And that I always remember that statement, because I thought it was so true. And it helps bring me back to being present in the midst of the difficulty. Drew, one day you're going to miss this. One day you're going to miss this. And it brings me that ability to refocus and stay in it when I sometimes wish, okay, can we get past this? So yeah. Just wanted to share that story. So I think really, really valuable. Great stuff, guys. Some really great, I think, principles that we've talked about. So as we wrap it up, we're asking our guests this year to share one question that dads should be asking themselves. And I mean, we have a couple different options, so I'm going to leave it to you guys. So what's one question you think dads should be asking themselves just to be the best type of father they can be? And then the follow-up is like, well, what's one action they can take from our conversation to become the best dad they can be?
Yeah. I mean, I think as far as a question they should be asking themselves is, how am I being supportive how am I being supportive, right? And that is in regards to your children, your tiny humans, but also your partner, if you have a partner, how am I being supportive to my partner? Because I think being supportive with your kids is great, right? Pushing them to do what they want to do, but also with your partner, you're now giving that viewpoint, like, hey, I have a father that was also supportive, not of me as my kid or as me as their kid, but also my other adult in my life, whether it be a mother, another father, whatever it may be. And I think being able to show that you're supportive, and that kind of goes back to the presence piece. I think being able to show that you're being supportive of that it is going to be hugely helpful in building those connections and bonds down the line. So I think, how can I support my household? I guess it's the best way to say that.
Yeah, I like that. And mine is in the same vein. Am I listening enough? And I think that we find ourselves so often. I mean, you can see the themes as I've talked about this, but if we're rushing, if we're directing, if we're okay, we got to do this and this. If we're okay, you have to put your shoes on right now because we got to get out the door at 8:00. Are you listening enough to what's actually going on, right? To your partner, to your kids, even like my 1.5-year-old obviously isn't speaking yet, but am I actually listening to what he needs in that moment and things like that? And it goes along with being supportive and being that, but am I listening enough? I think that's the question we should all be asking ourselves.
I want to add a friendly amendment. Are you listening to yourself? Especially what you're feeling, what you're experiencing, what you're thinking. Are you listening enough to yourself and responding in the same way that you want to respond and be supportive of your partner? Are you being as supportive to yourself too?
I love that.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Good stuff.
Yeah. Well, guys, this has been, for me, a great conversation. We've dropped into a couple of different areas, but it's been really valuable. And so I really want to say thank you for coming on the show. Thank you for sharing your stories. Thank you for giving us the wisdom and insight that you have. And thank you for the work that you're doing, having great conversations, bringing people into it. And, we talk about this idea of breaking the cycle. Well, it takes a lot of work. And you guys are doing that work and bringing others along. So real honor. So thank you guys.
Appreciate it. Thank you guys for having us. This was really great.
Yeah. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
Awesome. So where can people find out more and get access to you guys?
Hit it, Jared.
You can find us on Instagram at Big Dad Energy Podcast and on YouTube at Big Dad Energy Podcast. And then we have a website launching, bigdadenergypod.com. So you can go there. All of our links are there. There's some merch. There's some fun stuff. So you can find us at our website, on Instagram, or on YouTube. That's where we do most of our posting.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys. Ed, over to you.
Jared and Joe, want to say thank you for taking time out of your positive, productive schedules as fathers, as men, as servants to your family and others. And we appreciate all the time you've spent with us. And we want to continue the conversation. If there's anything we can potentially do to help out along the journey, we're here to support, because we're all, as I said during the conversation, we're all in one family. So really appreciate you. Want to bless both you. And as always, don't just manage your time, manage your energy. And remember to give both of you to give yourselves grace, and we'll keep in touch. Thanks very much and have an outstanding day.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Take care. All right, sir. It's your time.
The one word that comes to mind, just as we were wrapping up, was the word courage. I think Jared and Joe have a tremendous amount of courage to enter into the most important role that they're ever going to have, sometimes in a way that not everyone else would get or would have the courage to do. So that's my takeaway, is I think Jared and Joe are very courageous in their approach and what they're doing and how they're working towards achieving the goals that they have for themselves and for their families and for their children. So I just want to celebrate that and say it was an honor to have them on the show.
Absolutely. For me, it was the word I used throughout the conversation, presence. If you listen to both their journeys, there have been times where it's been very hard to be present and keep presence, but they have stayed the course. Like even from when they were growing up, they didn't have some of the greatest circumstances. And even sometimes their challenges as a father, scrolling through X, by the way. They're keeping their presence. So I want to bless them both for the outstanding job they're doing. They're fighting the fight. And, I think the pandemic was one of the best things that has happened for both of them, not only as fathers, but for their relationship and also for their families. So just to sum it up, as always, the Dad Central Show is sponsored by Dove Men Plus Care. Dove Men Plus Care believes that care is the best for men, because when men care for themselves and others, there's a positive impact. So we want to say, as always, email us, contact us, tell us what we're doing good. What can we improve on? Are there any guests you'd like to suggest for the Dad Central Show? We like to hear it all. Also, if you want to catch out replays of our epic conversations, dadcentral.ca/podcast, and also on Apple Podcasts. Rate us, please and thank you. And finally, we have a pile of complimentary resources on dadcentral.ca. Please check them out. We've got a lot of things to help dads, fathers, and male caregivers and families in general. So as always, I'd like to say thank you for watching or listening. And also, don't just manage your time, manage your energy, and remember to give yourselves grace. We'll see you soon. Be well and keep the faith.